3 turnovers, a loss, a defense that wore down in the second half, and a head coach who walked up to that podium and somehow sounded like the most confident man in the building. That right there should tell you something. Because Todd Monken did not come out of that press conference spinning a bad result into something it wasn't. He was direct about the mistakes. He was honest about what went wrong structurally. But buried underneath all of that accountability was something far more interesting than a post-game loss transcript. There was a coach who watched his quarterback room perform in live action for the first time and came away genuinely fired up about what he saw. And if you just looked at the box score and moved on, you missed the entire story. Now, before we go any further, drop one word in the comments right now. Just one. Watson or Sanders, that's it. One word. Tell me where your trust sits right now, because by the end of this video, your answer might change entirely. This is Gridiron Ground, and today we are doing something different. We are not doing a highlight reel of quotes. We are going through every meaningful thing Monken said in that press conference, pulling it apart piece by piece, and giving you the honest, complete picture that the quick takes completely missed. Stay with me, this gets interesting fast.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Welcome to Gridiron Ground. If you are new here, this is the place where we do not cut corners on the analysis, and we do not hand you a cleaned-up version of what actually happened. What you are getting today is the full, unfiltered breakdown of Todd Monken's post-game press conference after Cleveland dropped their preseason opener to Chicago, 3 turnovers included. And the first thing worth saying clearly, because it matters for everything that follows, is that Monken did not try to make this loss into something it wasn't. He stood at that podium and said flat out that this was not the outcome anybody wanted, that Cleveland didn't finish the game, and that both sides of the ball failed to hold up in the second half. That is a coach who understands the value of direct accountability, and that tone set the entire press conference from that opening moment forward. Now the 3 turnovers, because you simply cannot talk about this game without addressing that number head-on. Monken was blunt about it. You cannot turn the ball over 3 times and expect to win. Full stop. No hedging, no redirection, no attempt to bury that line underneath something more comfortable. He said it plainly and moved on. And that directness is actually meaningful when you consider how many coaches in this league have a habit of wrapping bad results in layers of careful language, designed to soften the edges of a rough afternoon. But here is where Monken did something smart, and where I think the quick take crowd missed the actual point of this press conference entirely. He did not pretend the mistakes didn't happen, but he also did not treat a preseason opener like a must-win regular season game. He framed the entire situation using a marathon analogy that is actually worth sitting with for a moment rather than just scrolling past. He said the real season starts in Jacksonville. He said this game represented Cleveland being 13 miles into the training process, with more ground to cover every single week between now and that opener. Think about what that framing actually means. A marathon runner at mile 13 is not supposed to be running at full race pace. They are building conditioning, testing mechanics, identifying what needs adjustment before the actual race begins. Monken was essentially telling everyone in that room that judging this team by the preseason opener score is the equivalent of judging a marathon runner's fitness by how they looked at the midpoint of a long training run. That is not an excuse. He was very clear that the mistakes were real and needed fixing. But it is context. And context matters enormously when you are evaluating a team still working through the earliest stages of installing a brand new system under a brand new head coach who has never held that specific title before at this level. The structural problems he identified were specific and honest. Cleveland's defense wore down as the game went on. The offense never found consistent traction after that opening drive when Sanders got stopped on 4th down. The run game never got established. And when your run game disappears completely, you end up stuck in 2nd and 12 and 3rd and 8 situations all afternoon, which puts enormous pressure on your quarterbacks and your entire offensive operation regardless of who is actually taking the snaps. He was blunt about the chain reaction that turnovers created in this specific game too. Turn it over, the opponent scores. Turn it over again, the opponent scores again. Your defense is now back on the field with a short rest, defending against a short field. They wear down. You fall further behind. And then the entire game plan starts bending under the weight of playing from behind against a defense that knows you need to throw the ball to come back. It is a genuinely ugly spiral, and Monken described it honestly, without trying to disguise it as something more manageable than it actually was. But here is the part that I think matters most coming out of this first section of the press conference. A coach who sugarcoats a bad result in the preseason is a coach who is already teaching his players the wrong lessons about.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Accountability. Monken did the opposite. He named the problems clearly, explained the cause and effect honestly, and then pivoted to what he actually saw from his quarterback room because that was the primary evaluation goal of this game to begin with. And that pivot is where this press conference stops being about a loss and starts being about something genuinely worth paying attention to heading into Buffalo week. We are just getting started, because what Monken said about Deshaun Watson next was not what most people expected to hear from a coach whose team just dropped a 3-turnover opener. And honestly, it is the part of this press conference that changes the entire conversation if you actually listen to it carefully. Almost 2 years. That is how long it had been since Deshaun Watson played meaningful football in a live setting before he walked onto that field against Chicago. Think about that for a second because the timeline matters enormously for understanding what Monken was actually reacting to when he stepped up to that podium. Nearly 2 full years of rehab, of practice reps with no real consequence attached, of working through the physical and mental grind of getting yourself back to a professional level after the kind of extended absence Watson has been dealing with. And then suddenly, you are out there in live action again. Real defenders, real pressure, real stakes, and everybody in the building is watching to see whether all of that work actually translated into something functional. Monken's answer when asked about Watson's half of work was not the careful, politically calibrated response you might have expected. He said it was awesome to watch him play. He acknowledged directly that some fans still carry real frustration given everything Watson has been through, and he did not dismiss that frustration or wave it away. But he said that watching Watson work his way back to this point and then go out there and genuinely have fun playing football again was a real credit to him as a person and as a competitor. That is a coach speaking from genuine observation, not from a prepared media statement designed to manage a narrative. The specifics of what Watson actually did on the field are worth unpacking here because the box score alone does not capture the full picture. Monken described Watson functioning at a high level throughout his half of work. He was athletic. He was engaged. He was reading the defense and making decisions with the kind of comfort and fluency that you would not necessarily expect from a quarterback returning from an absence this extended. There were moments where he worked out of genuinely difficult down and distance situations, including a 1st and 25 snap at one point, and found ways to keep the offense moving despite operating in those kinds of deep holes. There was also the hand and forearm situation worth addressing clearly because the internet had questions the moment that happened. Watson got his hand and forearm checked after taking a hit during the 2-minute drive. Monken confirmed plainly and directly that he is fine. No lingering concern. No follow-up procedure needed. It was evaluated, cleared, and that is the full story on that particular moment. Worth noting and worth moving past, without adding drama that the medical staff themselves did not indicate existed. Now here is the piece of this section that I think deserves more attention than it got in the immediate post-game reaction.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Monken specifically burned a timeout late in Watson's half, something he said explicitly he would never do in a real regular season game, specifically to manufacture a 2-minute drill evaluation opportunity for Watson before the half ended. He wanted Watson to get that specific situational rep, that specific test of managing clock, managing the offense under pressure, moving the ball with time running down against a real defense in a live setting. Think about what that decision actually tells you about how this coaching staff views Watson's development process. They are not just handing him comfortable situations and evaluating him on clean, ideal scenario play. They are actively engineering high-pressure evaluation moments in a preseason setting to get the most useful information possible before any real decisions get made. The timeout burn ended up setting up a field goal before halftime. In terms of pure game management, it was an unconventional call, but Monken was clear that this was an evaluation exercise, not a win-the-game decision, and the rep Watson got out of it was the entire point. He also addressed the operational issues that came up during Watson's time on the field. Untimely timeouts, a delay of game penalty. Monken was honest that Cleveland simply cannot afford those kinds of operational mistakes once the real games begin. But he framed those as cleanup items, not as fundamental concerns about Watson's readiness or ability to operate this offense at a high level. There is a meaningful difference between a quarterback who makes a bad football decision under pressure and a quarterback whose operation runs into some timing and communication inefficiencies in his first live game back after a nearly 2-year layoff. One of those problems is about football intelligence. The other is about rhythm and repetition, and rhythm comes back with reps. Monken's bottom line on Watson was expressed with zero hesitation when the reporter pushed him directly. Asked whether he has full confidence that Watson could function as a legitimately good starting NFL quarterback if he ends up winning this job, Monken said 100% yes, not with a qualifier attached, not with a hedge buried at the end of the sentence. A direct, unqualified statement of confidence from the head coach running this evaluation. That does not mean Watson has won anything yet. Monken was equally clear about that. But it does mean that whatever questions remain about this situation, Watson's fundamental readiness to operate at a starting level in this league is not reportedly among them, at least not from the perspective of the man actually watching him work every single day. And what Monken said about the other quarterback in this room is where this press conference gets even more layered. Because Sanders had an afternoon that was messier on the surface, and the way Monken chose to frame it says a great deal about how this coaching staff actually evaluates their players. Let's address the Sanders interception directly because it is the moment that generated the most immediate reaction online, and it is also the moment that requires the most careful, honest analysis rather than a quick emotional take. Here is what actually happened on that play based on Monken's description. Cleveland ran a clear-out concept with a dagger route. Sanders identified a receiver who was open. He had the right read. He made the decision to throw, and then the ball sailed on him. Possibly, according to Monken's in-the-moment assessment, affected by contact in his face as he released the throw. That is the sequence as described by the coach who called the play and watched it develop from the sideline in real time. Now here is the part that most of the post-game reaction completely missed. Monken immediately drew a direct parallel to Dillon Gabriel's interception that came later in the same game. He grouped both plays together under the same diagnostic explanation. Receivers were open. The protection held up or the read was correct. The ball sailed on the throw. And a humid, wet football was potentially a factor in both cases. He was not making excuses for either quarterback. He was trying to accurately diagnose what actually went wrong so that the coaching staff could address the right problem going forward. That distinction matters enormously, and I want to make sure it does not get lost here. There is a fundamental difference between a quarterback who makes the wrong read entirely, who looks at the wrong receiver, who panics under pressure and forces a ball into coverage, and a quarterback who identifies the right receiver and simply misses on the physical execution of the throw itself. Those are two completely different problems requiring two completely different coaching fixes. If you misdiagnose a mechanical or environmental execution issue as a decision-making problem, you end up coaching the wrong thing. You might start changing a quarterback's reads or pre-snap process when the actual issue is something in the throwing mechanics or the feel of a wet football on a humid afternoon. That kind of misdiagnosis tends to create more confusion and more problems than the original mistake ever would have on its own. Monken was very specifically trying to avoid that mistake in how he framed both interceptions publicly. Now let me be genuinely honest here because I think intellectual honesty requires it. A missed throw is still a missed throw. An interception is still an interception regardless of whether the process behind it was sound. Monken himself said he had not.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Fully reviewed the film yet at the time of the press conference, so his assessment was based on what he saw live from the sideline, rather than from the kind of detailed frame-by-frame analysis that comes later. It is entirely possible that the film shows something slightly different from his initial impression. That is worth acknowledging openly, rather than just taking one source's account as final and complete. But here is what I think is the most important layer of this entire interception discussion. Monken said specifically that he liked the process even when the result did not follow. He said the decision-making looked right even when the physical execution came up short. And for a young quarterback who is being evaluated not just on his stat line, but on his ability to process information correctly under live professional pressure, that is a meaningful distinction for this coaching staff to walk away with from Game 1. Think about what the alternative would look like. If Sanders had surveyed the defense, missed the open receiver, and forced a ball into traffic because he panicked under pressure, that is a processing problem. That is a problem that tends to be significantly harder to coach out because it lives in the mental and emotional space rather than the mechanical one. Mechanical issues can be isolated, worked on with repetition, and corrected with specific technical adjustments. Processing issues under pressure require a different kind of intervention entirely, and they tend to show up repeatedly across different situations rather than just in isolated moments. Monken specifically walked away from this game believing Sanders' issue was the former rather than the latter. A mechanical execution miss under pressure rather than a fundamental decision-making breakdown. Whether the film ultimately supports that read fully is something we will have to wait and see. But the fact that the head coach running this evaluation came away with that specific interpretation and chose to pair Sanders' interception directly with Gabriel's rather than singling it out as something uniquely concerning tells you a great deal about how this staff is thinking about the young quarterback heading into the most important evaluation stretch of his professional career so far. One more thing worth adding here before moving forward. The fact that Monken was willing to say all of this publicly, with full knowledge that it would get analyzed and debated, rather than deflecting or giving a vague non-answer, suggests a coaching staff operating with a high degree of transparency about their evaluation process. And transparency in an open competition like this one is actually a genuinely good sign for the players involved, because it means the criteria being used to make the final decision are at least somewhat visible and understandable rather than buried inside a black box. What happened next in this press conference was even more revealing, because when Monken was asked directly about where the quarterback competition actually stands right now, His answer was about as clear and honest as you are ever going to get from a head coach mid-competition. Pretty even. That was Monken's direct answer when pushed on where the quarterback competition stands heading out of this game. 2 words. No diplomatic cushioning, no lengthy explanation designed to make everyone feel good while revealing nothing. Just a direct, honest read from the head coach running the evaluation. And honestly, pretty even after one preseason game where both quarterbacks showed real positives and both showed real areas in need of correction, is probably exactly where you want this competition to be at this stage. If one player had blown the other completely out of the water in a single preseason opener, you would wonder whether the sample size was large enough to actually support a firm conclusion. The fact that it remains genuinely open means the evaluation process itself has room to breathe and produce something more meaningful than a snap judgment. The plan for the Buffalo game is about as concrete and specific as you are going to get from a coaching staff mid-competition, and Monken laid it out with zero ambiguity. Sanders starts. Watson plays the third quarter. Dillon Gabriel closes out the fourth.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Is an intentional flip from how this game was structured, and it gives both primary candidates a look from a completely different position within the same game environment. Sanders gets the starter experience. Watson gets a different situational window, and the coaching staff gets another full data point from a completely different opponent before making any real declaration. What is equally interesting is what Monken said about the joint practice against Buffalo on Thursday, because he gave genuinely detailed and thoughtful insight into how those reps will actually get distributed. He said the plan depends heavily on how that practice actually goes. If starters and upper-level backups get heavily worked in Thursday's joint practice against a real Buffalo opponent, some of those same players might not even suit up for meaningful action in the actual Saturday game. He specifically does not want to run his key players hard against a legitimate opponent on Thursday, and then immediately ask them to do it again 2 days later. That tells you something important about how this coaching staff approaches player management, even within the context of an open competition. They are not burning players carelessly for the sake of generating evaluation reps. They are thinking carefully about workload, recovery, and the long-term health of the roster, while still trying to get enough useful information to make an informed decision before the real season begins. Those 2 goals are not always easy to balance simultaneously, and the fact that Monken was transparent enough to explain how he was thinking about that specific tension is genuinely useful context. He was also honest about the inherent imperfection of splitting reps fairly between 2 quarterbacks competing for the same job. You are never going to get truly identical situational blocks for each player. One quarterback might get a longer sustained drive that tests his ability to operate through multiple series. The other might get more concentrated third down situations or 2-minute drill reps. The situations are never perfectly matched, and Monken acknowledged that directly rather than pretending the evaluation process was some kind of perfectly controlled scientific experiment with identical conditions for each candidate. What matters is that the overall picture, across practice reps, preseason games, joint practices against real competition, and the qualitative read the coaching staff develops from watching these players every single day, adds up to something meaningful enough to make a decision with real confidence behind it. And Monken was clear that they are not rushing that process. He said when pushed on whether someone could realistically win the job outright after the Buffalo game that he is simply not ready to make that call yet. He wants to get through that game, evaluate everything including what the players themselves say about how they felt and what they saw, and then continue building from there. I want to pause here for a moment because I think the timing question is worth examining honestly. Some people will read Monken's unwillingness to name a starter right now as indecision, or as a sign that he genuinely does not know what to do. I think that reading misses the actual situation. This is a coaching staff in the middle of a deliberate, structured evaluation process with a specific timeline. They have not reached the end of that timeline yet. Making a premature declaration based on insufficient data would not be decisive leadership. It would be the opposite. It would be a coaching staff caving to external pressure and making an important organizational decision before they have gathered the information they actually need to make it well. Monken specifically mentioned that this is an ongoing evaluation process for the coaching staff too, not just for the players. He said they are going to look back critically at how they coached, how they schemed things, and think seriously about who they want moving forward. That is a head coach who understands that the evaluation in a competition like this goes in multiple directions simultaneously. It is not just about the players performing. It is about the coaching staff creating the right environment and the right situations to actually see what these players are capable of doing. What he said about Sanders specifically, the most important evaluation criterion he said he was watching for, is something that deserves its own dedicated space in this breakdown, because it reveals more about how this coaching staff actually thinks about quarterback evaluation than any single completion percentage or passer rating ever could. Here is the most important quote from this entire press conference, and I am going to make sure it gets the full attention it deserves rather than getting buried underneath the interception conversation. When asked about his primary evaluation goal for Sanders in this game, Monken did not say he wanted to see a clean stat line. He did not say he was looking for a specific completion percentage or a specific number of yards. He said the number one thing he wanted to evaluate was whether Sanders looked comfortable, whether he was enjoying himself through the ups and downs of a genuinely rough second half. Read that again because it matters. The head coach's primary evaluation criterion for his young quarterback was not a statistical outcome. It was an emotional and psychological one. Was he comfortable? Was he having fun despite the adversity? Did he stay engaged and competitive when things were not going perfectly? That is a coaching staff operating with a sophisticated understanding of what quarterback evaluation actually requires at the professional level. Because the stat line in a preseason game against a defense that is also...
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
So running vanilla, also evaluating its own players, and also not showing its full scheme is not a particularly meaningful data point on its own. But the way a young quarterback carries himself emotionally through a difficult afternoon, the way he responds to a rough stretch rather than shutting down or becoming visibly rattled, that is a window into what he is actually going to look like when the games count and the pressure is real and the margin for error is gone entirely. Monken acknowledged that Sanders probably was not thrilled about missing a couple of throws that could have extended drives. He noted that Sanders probably was not entirely comfortable with getting called on the quarterback sneak either, which was worth pausing on for a separate reason entirely. Because the backstory on that specific play is genuinely revealing about the dynamic building between this head coach and his young quarterback. Monken said when the sneak came up in the game planning conversation, Sanders told him directly and without hesitation that he could handle it. He described himself as a powerful guy who could get the tough short yardage inches when needed. And Monken said he liked that mentality immediately. He just told Sanders to go ahead and roll with it. That is a small moment in the context of a full press conference, but it is not a trivial one. It reveals a level of communication and growing trust between a head coach and a young quarterback, who are still relatively early in their relationship with each other. Sanders is not waiting to be told what he can and cannot do. He is asserting his own confidence and his own capabilities, and a coaching staff that responds positively to that kind of communication is one that is going to get the best out of a young player who needs to operate with genuine belief in himself to be effective. Now here is the actual bottom line from Monken on the bigger picture Sanders evaluation question. When asked directly whether Sanders answered those larger questions positively in this game, Monken said plainly that in his mind, yes, he did. Not with extensive qualification, not wrapped in careful hedging language. A direct answer to a direct question. In his evaluation, Sanders passed the most important test Monken set up for him in this game. That is meaningful because it tells you that despite the interception, despite the missed throws, despite the rough second half that Cleveland's offense went through as a collective unit, the head coach running this evaluation walked away from this game with a genuinely positive overall impression of his young quarterback's composure, competitiveness, and emotional readiness to handle the ups and downs of professional football. Those are not box score qualities. Those are character qualities, and character qualities tend to be the ones that determine whether a talented young player ultimately becomes a reliable long-term starter or someone who flashes potential without ever quite putting it all together consistently. One thing worth examining in this context is what Monken's positive read on Sanders actually means for the overall competition dynamic going forward. It does not hand Sanders the job. The competition is still genuinely open, and Watson is still a legitimate challenger with a full quarter of live action showing his own real positives. But it does suggest that the narrative of Sanders being the shaky, uncertain, mistake-prone option in this competition is significantly more complicated than a quick glance at the interception column would suggest. A coaching staff that walks away from Game 1 genuinely encouraged about a young quarterback's composure and decision-making process, even with a turnover sitting on the stat sheet, is a coaching staff that is going to keep giving that quarterback real, meaningful opportunities to prove himself through the rest of this evaluation process. And in a competition this closely watched, that level of continued coaching confidence is not a minor thing. It is the kind of organizational backing that can actually shape how a competition ultimately resolves. Gridiron Ground is where we stay after the press conference ends and dig into what was actually said when most people have already moved on to the next quick take. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, take 2 seconds and subscribe right now so you never miss a full breakdown like this one. What happened when the conversation turned to the broader offensive picture is where this press conference shifted from quarterback-specific analysis into something bigger about the structural challenges this team still needs to address before Jacksonville. Pull back from the quarterback conversation for a moment and look at the broader offensive picture Monken painted in this press conference, because there are some genuinely important structural observations buried in his comments that deserve attention separately from the debate over Watson versus Sanders. The run game is the starting point for that broader discussion. Monken was specific and direct about it. Cleveland could not establish any consistent run game in this particular game, and when your run game disappears, the entire offensive operation bends under the weight of that absence in ways that affect everything else downstream. Your down and distances get longer. Your quarterbacks face 2nd and 12 instead of 2nd and 4. Your play action loses credibility because the defense has no reason to respect your ability to run the ball. And your quarterbacks, whoever they are, end up operating in the kind of extended, difficult situations that make even elite players look inefficient. This is critical context for evaluating the turnovers and the broader offensive struggles in this game. Both quarterbacks were essentially operating all afternoon in situations that a functional run game would have made significantly more manageable. Monken identified this specifically as a coaching and execution issue that needs real attention heading into the regular season, and he was clear that it represents one of the genuine areas of improvement that this team needs to focus on before the real games begin. He was also honest that the offensive line needs to be better in run blocking, in pass protection setup, and in play action execution. These are not catastrophic admissions from a first-year head coach after a preseason opener, but they are honest ones, and honesty about structural weaknesses in August.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
August is considerably more useful than discovering them for the first time in a regular season game that actually affects the standings. Now let's get to the bright spots, because there were real ones buried in this game, even with the rough box score sitting on top of everything else. Monken specifically praised getting meaningful touches to Cleveland's skill players, including a rookie who scored his first career professional touchdown. He credited the coaching staff's deliberate effort to get that player the ball through a punt return, and a jet sweep specifically designed to create space for him to operate in. He said he was genuinely happy for that player specifically, noting how hard he had worked, and that he made the most of the opportunities that were created for him. That detail about the jet sweep is worth pausing on briefly, because it tells you something about how Monken thinks about offensive design even in a preseason opener. He was not just running a generic evaluation game. He had specific plays designed to put specific players in favorable positions to succeed, and when those plays worked and that player delivered, it was not an accident. It was the result of deliberate coaching and deliberate game planning, even in a context where the primary evaluation goal was at the quarterback position. Spencer Fano getting extended run at left tackle for the entirety of Watson's time on the field was another specific note worth including. Monken confirmed that was the deliberate plan. Let Fano keep accumulating development reps while other starters got pulled out of the game for rest management purposes. Again, this is a coaching staff thinking carefully about individual player development within the broader context of evaluation game management, not just handing out reps randomly. The offensive picture Monken painted is genuinely honest. There are real things to fix. The run game needs to find its footing. The offensive line needs to clean up its operation in multiple areas. The overall execution in the second half, on both sides of the ball, was not close to where this team needs it to be when the real season begins. None of that is particularly surprising coming out of a preseason opener with a brand new coaching staff still in the early stages of installing its system. But here is what matters most about how Monken addressed these structural issues. He separated them clearly from his evaluation of the quarterback position. He was not conflating the run game struggles with concerns about his quarterbacks. He was not blaming the operational inefficiencies on the players at the most scrutinized position on the roster. He was identifying specific areas of coaching and collective execution that need to improve while simultaneously maintaining that both quarterbacks gave him genuine reason for confidence in what they were specifically asked to evaluate in this game. That kind of analytical precision in a post-game press conference is actually rarer than it should be. It would have been easy and understandable for Monken to let the broad narrative of a 3-turnover loss absorb the entire press conference. Instead, he broke it apart piece by piece, identified what the actual problems were in specific terms, and separated those problems from the things he came away genuinely encouraged about. That is a coaching staff operating with real clarity about what they are trying to build and how they are going about the process of building it. What Monken expressed next about his full confidence in Watson as a starting caliber quarterback is the part of this press conference that I think carries the most long-term weight for how this competition ultimately gets resolved. 100%. That is the number Monken attached to his confidence in Deshaun Watson's ability to function as a legitimately good starting NFL quarterback if he ultimately wins this competition. And the context around how that answer came out matters just as much as the answer itself. The reporter who asked that question was not lobbing a softball. The question was direct and pointed. After everything that has happened, after the extended absence, after all of the uncertainty and noise surrounding this quarterback in this situation, do you genuinely have full confidence that Watson could go out there and function as a good starter in this league. Monken did not pause. He did not glance away or choose diplomatic language designed to thread a careful needle. He said 100% yes and moved on. Now let's examine what that means and what it does not mean, because there are two ways to read that statement, and only one of them is actually accurate. It does not mean Watson has won the job. Monken was emphatically clear throughout this press conference that the competition remains genuinely open heading into Buffalo week and beyond. It does not mean the evaluation process is over, or that the coaching staff has already settled on a conclusion. It is now publicly justifying rather than honestly discovering. What it does mean is that whatever the legitimate questions surrounding Watson might be at this stage of his career, his fundamental capability as a starting quarterback in this league is not reportedly one of them from the perspective of his own head coach. There are plenty of factors that go into deciding which quarterback starts week 1 of the regular season. Readiness, comfort in the specific system, overall team chemistry with that player operating at the center of the offense, the ability to manage the operational side of running a professional offense consistently without the kinds of errors that give back yardage or field position. Those are all part of the equation. But the most foundational question in any quarterback competition is a simpler one. Is this player actually good enough to win games in the National Football League at a starting level? And Monken answered that question about Watson with complete certainty. Yes, no qualification attached. Here is why I think that specific answer matters as much as it does. Coaches are not careless with that kind of language in competitive situations this closely watched. When a head coach in the middle of an open competition gives a direct, unqualified statement of confidence in one of his players' fundamental abilities, that is a deliberate choice. He had every opportunity to soften it. He could have said something like he believes Watson has the tools, or that he expects Watson to continue developing, or that he thinks Watson showed real positive signs in this game. All of those would have been supportive without being fully committing. He did not choose any of those options. He said 100% and stopped talking. That kind of directness in a coach's language is itself a form of communication that goes beyond the literal content of the words and signals a level of genuine private confidence that the public statement is simply reflecting honestly. This is also the section of the press conference where Monken pushed back specifically on some of the broader doubts that had been circulating about this offense heading into the game. Doubts about whether Cleveland had enough skilled talent around its quarterbacks. Doubts about the running back room. He said those doubts are simply not accurate based on what he actually saw in this game. His specific concern was more targeted. Not that the talent is not there, but that Cleveland did not run the ball effectively enough in this particular game, and that the run game's absence created cascading problems throughout the entire offensive operation. That is an important reframe of the post-game narrative. The issue in this game was not a lack of talent around the quarterbacks. The issue was execution in the run game failing to give those quarterbacks the kind of favorable situations they need to operate most efficiently. Fix the run game execution, and the entire offensive picture looks meaningfully different. And Monken was specific in crediting both quarterbacks for producing real positive moments despite spending most of this game operating in the harder, longer down and distance situations that a functioning run game would have prevented. Gridiron Ground breaks these press conferences down completely because the score is never the whole story. If you want the full picture every single time, subscribe right now and you will never miss a breakdown like this one. We are here every time Cleveland does something worth talking about. There is one final piece of this press conference worth giving real attention before wrapping up, because it shows a side of Monken that does not always come through in the analytical coverage, and it actually matters for understanding the kind of head coach Cleveland is working with in year 1 of this rebuild. Near the very end of this press conference, Something shifted in tone in a way that is worth preserving rather than cutting for the sake of keeping things moving. Monken brought up his first challenge flag of the preseason season with a genuine, self-deprecating laugh. He said something to the effect that nobody makes more mistakes in a game than he does himself, and that he went 1 for 1 on his first challenge attempt, so at least his track record was starting clean. He said reporters are going to call him out plenty of times this season when he gets a decision wrong, so he was glad to get at least one right in the first opportunity. That moment is small in the context of everything else that was said, but it is genuinely revealing. A coach who can laugh at himself in a post-game setting after a 3-turnover loss, who can acknowledge his own fallibility with genuine humor rather than guarding his image behind defensive language, is a coach who is operating from a place of real security. And that kind of security tends to trickle down into the culture a team builds around itself over time. Insecure coaches protect themselves in press conferences. They give vague answers to avoid being pinned down. They deflect accountability toward their players and redirect questions about performance back toward process language that sounds meaningful but says nothing specific. Monken did not do any of that. He was direct about the loss. He was direct about the turnovers. He was direct about where the competition stands. He was direct about his confidence in his quarterbacks. And then he was willing to be genuinely funny about his own imperfections in the same breath. That is a human being coaching a football team, not a carefully media-trained spokesperson reading a prepared statement. And I think that distinction matters enormously for what Cleveland is trying to build under this first-year head coach. But here is the actual closing moment of this press conference that functions as the real headline underneath everything else that was said. Monken said directly and clearly that he is fired up, that he believes this team is only going to keep developing and improving, especially as these young players continue to grow into the system with each week of preparation. And specifically on the quarterback position, he said he was hoping to go into this game and watch his quarterbacks play and function at a high level. And from his vantage point on the sideline, despite the final score and despite the 3 turnovers sitting on the stat sheet, that is exactly what he saw. Sit with that for a moment. A head coach watched his team lose a 3-turnover preseason opener and walked away from the podium fired up about the direction of his quarterback room. That is either a coach who is dramatically out of touch with reality, or a coach who watched something in live action that the box score genuinely did not capture. Based on everything he actually said throughout this press conference, the specific details, the honest diagnostics, the direct accountability alongside the genuine enthusiasm, it reads clearly as the latter. Both quarterbacks reportedly made correct reads on their respective interceptions, with the physical execution being the identified issue rather than the decision-making. Watson looked athletic, engaged, and genuinely happy to be playing professional football again after a long and difficult absence. Sanders showed real composure and competitiveness working through a rough second half, came in cold off the bench, and still delivered legitimate positive plays early in his stint. The coaching staff is thinking carefully about player management, rep distribution, and workload heading into the most important evaluation stretch of this preseason. And the competition remains genuinely, honestly open with real live action against a completely different opponent still to come before any declaration gets made. That is not the story a 3-turnover box score tells on its own, but it is the story that actually matters heading into Buffalo week and beyond. Here is where everything lands after pulling this entire press conference apart piece by piece. A 3-turnover preseason loss is always going to generate a specific kind of immediate reaction, and almost none of that reaction is patient enough to sit with the actual substance of what the coaching staff said afterward. The box score wins the first news cycle. The press conference tells you what the season actually looks like from the inside. Monken gave everyone in that room and everyone watching a clear, honest read. The mistakes were real. The run game needs to work. The defense needs more support from an offense that can stay on the field. The operational inefficiencies need cleanup before Jacksonville. None of that was hidden or softened or buried. But underneath all of that accountability was something genuinely important. A head coach who watched both of his quarterbacks operate in live action for the first time under his system and came away encouraged rather than alarmed. Not blindly optimistic. Not spinning a loss into a win. Encouraged. There is a meaningful difference between those things, and Monken clearly understands what that difference looks like. Buffalo Week is where the real picture starts to sharpen. Sanders starting, Watson in the third quarter, a joint practice against a real opponent on Thursday before the game even happens. More data, more live evaluation, more clarity about what this coaching staff actually has at the most important position on their roster. The quarterback competition is genuinely open. The process is genuinely honest. And the head coach running it is genuinely fired up about where it is headed. That combination is rare enough to be worth paying attention to carefully rather than just scrolling to the next take. Drop your honest read in the comments right now. One word, process or panic. Tell Gridiron Ground exactly where your head is after everything Monken said. And stay right here because Buffalo Week changes everything.